asato ma sadagamaya tamaso homaham jyotirgamaya mriturmam amritam gamaya aviraha virmaihi rudra yate dakshinam mukha te namaha pa inityam. Om. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. Okay. So my subject this morning is speech karma. And let's get right into it. Karma is self-conscious, volitional, free will, human action. Every such action has a moral valence and is governed by the law of karma. This is a universal, natural, moral law that corresponds in the physical world to the law of causation and Newton's third law of motion of action and reaction. The doer of karma is the jivatma, that is the embodied soul under the veil of spiritual ignorance, which we call the ego. Every karmic action has two effects. One is direct and immediate. The other is indirect and roundabout. The first effect we can compare with the visualize a sculptor who's carving out a figure from a block of marble using a hammer and a chisel. And every act of karma is like a hammer blow on that chisel. Chips out a little bit of our personality, our character, and shapes and makes us what we are today. The second effect of karma, which is indirect and which is roundabout, which goes around like a boomerang out into the world, travels through time and space, and eventually returns to us just like a boomerang. And we can see those two effects, one direct and immediate, the other indirect. If we could think of maybe playing an old-fashioned game of billiards or pool, and if we take the pool cue, and if we strike the ball, if we use the right technique, then immediately and directly our expertise and our skill will be reinforced. But there's a second effect, and that is now the cue ball has hit the others, and the balls are all rolling around on the table, and they will reconfigure themselves in a way that may be beneficial, or it may place us in difficulty. Now, there are three kinds of karma: thought, speech, and action. These are all activities. This morning we're focusing on speech karma. You may not think of talking and speaking as belonging in the category of karma, but certainly it is, because we're using a karmendriya, that is the vak indriya, that is the organ of speech, which is just like our hands and feet. And our every speech act has all the characteristics of the philosophy of action, of an action, which begins with a belief and a desire and a prior intention in action, physical movement, bodily movement, consequences, all those are part. So it certainly qualifies as an action, and it's very much like, well, when we think. To think is just to speak low. And to our physical behavior is just acting out, doing what we said that we were going to do. So they're all three are connected together. And they're all governed by the law of karma. If we do good actions, then good will return to us. If we do evil actions, then we will have difficulties and suffer in our life. Now, this morning we're going to analyze our speech acts, and I'm going to use an old-fashioned sort system that first appeared in the Sankhya cosmology. It's called the three gunas: sattva, rajas, and tamas. The red, the white, and the black. These are three generally orienting categories. They're not rigorously defined, but they're very helpful sometimes for us to broadly categorize different aspects of our life experience. So we're going to do a moral inventory about all of the things that we've said in our life. If you were to take everything that you've ever said and put it into a big barrel. Just imagine a barrel of apples. And now we have all that information. So we take that barrel of apples and we can overturn it and spread them out before us. And now we're going to examine them. Some of them are spoiled, and we set them aside. Others are very good, ready for market. And many others are somewhere in between. Let's begin with the first category of speech acts. And we're going to use these Sanskrit words, tamas, which literally means darkness, and which is associated with the element of earth, which is heavy, dark. Just think of a lump of clod of earth, characterized by inertia. The adjective here is going to be tamasic, and we're going to use the old-fashioned Indo-European suffix IC to Americanize the word. So a tamasic speech act is an act then which is characterized by gross ignorance. And let's try to make a kind of a list in our minds of what those actions would be like. Well, on the very first of the list, we'd have to take something like untruthfulness and telling lies, because we know that the truth condition that we can't think, we can't speak, we can't communicate with others, we can't have any rational discourse. unless we mean what we say, and therefore that undercuts the whole of verbal discourse. Certainly we have to include in this category of Tamasic speech any illegal, unlawful acts like perjury and slander and defamation of character. But we can focus too on things which are maybe not illegal, maybe not even immoral, but which we know are somehow belong in this category. One, for example, would be harmful speech. You know, John Stuart Mill, one of the fathers of the liberal democracy, and one of the first exponents of free speech. He used to say, you should be free to say whatever you want, but do no harm. In other words, harmful speech, well, we can think about what it means. Hate speech, speaking ill of others, calling people names, speaking out in anger in such a way that we hurt and harm another. And once there was a boy who had this bad habit. And he used to speak out impulsively without any thought about what would be the consequences, as a result of which he'd lost all of his friends. And so he went one day to his father, told him his problem. His father was a carpenter. He listened to the boy, and he had with him a bag of nails. Handed the boy that bag of nails and a hammer. And then said, you see outside, you see that wooden fence in the backyard? I want you to go out today, and whenever you speak impulsively and do some harm, I want you to hammer a nail into one of those posts in the backyard. And so the boy went out, and the first day, well, he hammered 3 nails. Second day, another 3 nails. Third day, well, he got down to 2 nails. And as time passed, though, he found out it was a lot of work, too much work to hammer those nails in. So it kind of began working on his psyche, and sure enough, little by little, he got down to 1 nail, and a couple days went by, he didn't hammer any. And so he went back in and spoke to his father. Father, I think I've overcome my bad habit. Very good, said the father. Now, why don't you go out and see how long you can maintain it? And for every day that you can observe what you're saying, he said, pull out 1 nail, use the hammer, pull out 1 nail. So the boy did that. First day, he pulled out 1 nail, and he pulled out another nail the next day. And gradually time passed until he pulled out all of the nails. Went back into the father. The father said, oh, well, yes, very good. Let's go out and look at that fence. They went out and looked at the fence. The father said, you see thou? All of those nails that were driven in have been pulled out. But the marks still remain. Similarly it is with all of those things that you said before, all those hurtful remarks, even though you might have forgotten them, still the scars remain. And they're part of your karmic action. So this Tamasic speech, we're just going down the list here. Certainly we can include in this list all manner of common swearing, profanity, obscenity, vulgarity, blasphemy. We know profanity, well, that's the 3rd commandment, the 10 Commandments, taking the Lord's name in vain, that is using God's name as kind of a throwaway word, just to express our our impatience or our vexation. Blasphemy is similar. It's using sacred names and things which are supposed to be big and great and treating them as if they're small and as inconsequential. And we know that everything in the world has a logos. That is, it has a purpose. It has it has a meaning. And just as you have tools in your toolbox, we know very well that you don't abuse your tools. You don't misuse your tools. Every tool has a telos. It has a way that it should be treated. There's a way that people and things should be treated. And if we don't treat them in the way that they ought to be treated, then that's an offense against justice. And justice is nothing but the law of justice. That's karma. So we have profanity, and we have obscenity. We have blasphemy, and we have obscenity. And in English, we have 1,500,000 words. And of those thousands of words, a small handful of four-letter words seems to have surfaced and become part of common everyday parlance. And we may say, well, it's a sign of Western decadence. It's a sign probably of the decline and the fall of the Roman Empire. And in fact, children long ago were told that if they used such words, that they had to wash their mouths out with soap. But the yogis don't go that far. But the yogis point to a principle. There is a principle behind it. And that is that spiritual life is all about a battle. It's a warfare, in fact, between the spirit and the flesh. And by the flesh, of course, St. Paul did not mean the flesh and blood body, but he meant those desires and those actions which have their origin in that part of ourselves which is alienated and rebels against the spirit soul within us. And so these two don't go together. Rama and Kama, those two they don't go together. They don't mix. So this part of Tamasic speech, common swearing, profanity, blasphemy, obscenity, vulgarity. Vulgarity just means that you use barnyard language when you're not in the barnyard. And it may be that if you're a farmer and you come in one day to town, you're going to have dinner with your citified friends. Certainly you change your clothes, and certainly you will change consciously or unconsciously your register of your speech. And why is that? That's because it would be considered to use vulgar speech would be considered to be in poor taste. And that's so. It's what the whole spiritual life. The whole of life, spiritual life begins with viveka. That means discrimination. That means you have to be a man of discrimination, a man of good taste. And whether it's into your clothes that you choose, or the food that you eat, or the places that you visit, or the words that you speak, Of course, the yogis are speaking there about discriminating between the real and the unreal, between the moral good and the evil. But the same principle holds true. Cultivating a sense of be discriminating in our usage. So that's just common swearing. We can think too about cursing. We can think about how many times it is that you've heard you were sitting quietly, absorbed in thought, and maybe your neighbors were playing loud music, and you went over to the window and you just cussed them out. Well, students of the Mantra Shastra, when they hear that, they're shocked. Because even though you may think that you didn't mean what you said, really that's a kind of black magic, because words have vibrations. Words mean things. And they go out into the world and they change the state of affairs. And they have the two effects, which will return to you. And you remember maybe the story in the Mahabharata of the saint. His name was Durvasa. Durvasa they said, he was one of the 7 sages. He was a great jnani. But he had one shortcoming, that is, he had a very hot temper. He was short-tempered. And when he'd come into a village, he'd go from door to door, begging for food, and maybe a householder would come and put something into his hands, and he would taste it. And if it wasn't to his liking, it may be that he would curse that householder. And because he was such a great sage, it wasn't just that poor one person, but he was cursed back for 7 generations. Well, it wasn't long before people in every village, when they heard that Durvasa was in town, they closed their doors, they boarded up, they shuttered their windows, they turned out all the lights, and they pretended like they weren't home. And the poor sage would wander up and down the streets, didn't get a bite or a morsel to eat. It was only later on that Sri Krishna took compassion on him. And so like this, there are stories of the consequences of his bad temper. And let's look at another kind of Tamasic speech. And that would be like complaining, griping, grumbling, and groaning about everything that happens. Maybe, as we know, in life, many times things don't go our way. There are difficulties in life. And there's one of the prerequisites for the practice of all the forms of yoga in Vedanta. There's certain prerequisites which are assumed. And one of those is called forbearance. Titiksha. That is, it's assumed that a spiritual aspirant, before you can seriously even do spiritual practice, that you have to be established in this virtue of forbearance, that is, being willing to bear up with the little difficulties of life without complaining. Once there was a boy who wanted to join a Trappist monastery. He went for an interview with the abbot. The abbot said, yes, you go there and live in the monastery, but we observe here a vow of silence, which you will have to follow for a long time. He said, but after 5 years, you can come back here and you can speak to me. And so the new monk, he went out and he began to live there in the monastery. The time passed, year after year after year. Finally, after 5 years, he went back for his interview with the abbot, who asked him, "Well, how are you doing, my boy?" And the young monk said, "The food is very bad." "Oh," said the abbot, said, "Oh, don't worry about it. You go back, continue practicing." And so he did. He went back, practiced again for next year, the next year, and the next year. Another 5 years passed. Came back, he had a second interview. The abbot asked him, "Well, how's it going? How are things going now?" And the young monk said, "The bed is very hard." "Oh," said the abbot, said, "Don't worry about it. You go back, continue practicing." So the monk went back, and another year's passed, year after year, finally came back now. Third interview with the abbot. "Well, my boy, how's it going?" And the young monk said, "I quit." And the abbot looked at him and he said, "Yeah, I suspected as much." He said, "All you've been doing is complaining anyway." So that was the attitude of the abbot of the monastery. Now, what? Because that's very indication, a fundamental aspect of character, that is lack of forbearance. So these are just some Tamasic speech acts. Tamasic speech is like junk food that's high in sugar, it's deep fried, and that is fattening and is processed and does mean things to our body. Similarly it is with these Tamasic speech acts. They're harmful for our spiritual life, and they drag our mind downward. So let's look at a second category, these broad generalizing categories that are not rigorously defined. And that is rajas. Sattva, tamas, sattva, rajas. Rajas means energy. If tamas means matter, then we could say that rajas just means energy. And it's associated with fire, the element of fire. And think about a stream of rushing, bubbling, gurgling water, or a wind that's blowing. These are all rajasic. Just sometimes it's translated as dust. And you can think maybe of a windstorm which is blowing up a lot of dust, and there's all these particles are just bouncing all around. It's just total chaos and confusion. And maybe that reminds us of our own mind. Yogis speak about the monkey mind. You know, a monkey is just naturally restless, jumping around, and his tension is scattered. But just imagine if he was stung by a bee. Oh, he'd been much more restless and wild in his behavior. And then maybe he drank a bottle of wine, and now he's beginning to dance around. He can't stand up. He's totally out of control. Then maybe a demon entered into him. He's even more wild. And then someone takes that monkey and makes him dance on a hot metal plate. We can imagine how wild and crazy that monkey mind becomes. It's rajas. This is the guna that's characteristic of the worldly mind, the worldly man. The worldly man is the straw man of the Vedanta philosophy, maybe. And the worldly man is a person whose mind is governed by the guna of rajas. That is, his attention is scattered. His mind is externalized. He's materialistic. He's the mind of the jiva, identified with the body, the senses, and the manas, that is the lower mind, the passions. and with the activities in the world, who rides the roller coaster of success and failure in life, goes up and down and round and round. In fact, this is the world. In fact, this is our self. This is our very self before the awakening of spiritual consciousness. Controlled and governed by the guna of rajas. That worldly person, the content of his speech, because his mind is externalized, and because his entire intention is on worldly affairs, out of the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks, and therefore the content of speech is entirely secular and not interested at all in soul, God, and religion. But it may be that sometime he may begin to hold forth on those subjects, but when he does, everybody knows that it's just empty talk. That's rajasic speech. It's empty talk. Once there was a boy who lived in a little village. His name was Pogo. He's a mischievous and lazy boy. And while all of the villagers were working together in the fields, he would just be fooling around. And one day he wandered off. He wandered down the road and up the hill, and there was an abandoned Shiva temple. The image had been removed, and it was all dilapidated. It was filled with dust, and the banyan tree, the roots had grown up through the floor of the temple. And he wandered around there. Podo, he wandered around there. And then he saw the temple bell. The bell here means like a gong. It's like a heavy round metal disc. It's hanging there. And he took a big stick and he began to sound that bell. Well, all of the villagers down working the fields, they heard that, so that's the temple bell. Well, it must be some holy man has come. Maybe he's reinstalled the image of Shiva. Oh, we have to go. So they put down all their tools, and they got cleaned up, and together they wended their way up the hill to the temple. But when they got there, what did they see? Well, this looked like the same temple. It was all dilapidated. They looked inside. It was all dust. And nothing had been done. And there they saw. There was Podo. And they realized that he'd been the one that had been made the sound of that bell. And so they chastised him. Said, "Oh, you mischievous boy, you've made all this sound. It's all this big sound for nothing. And we come up here, but there's no image in the temple. It's all empty sound." So there's rajasic speech. It's empty talk. It's talk that rushes on. If we think about our speech, that is our mental speech, our thoughts, stream of thought, rushing and flowing and turbulent, rushing stream. And excessive speech. That's rajasic speech. And I think usually that's about this. There was a great American writer, Mark Twain. He used to work on the river boats, and think of a stream of words. And the river boats cannot work without unless there's 6 feet of water minimum. That's about 2 fathoms. So that was his name. He took that name as a pseudonym, Mark Twain. Later on, he wrote letters, which are still studied today. In fact, in Pasadena is the Huntington Library. That's where all the original Mark Twain literature is kept, so scholars come from all over the world to study those letters. One letter is over 5 pages long. And at the very end, he signs the letter and he says, P.S., please excuse me for writing such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one. Now, of course, he was being humorous, but there's a grain of truth in it. It takes a longer time, certainly, to edit and to think through our thoughts. That's why they say think twice before you speak once. It takes a longer time. It's a slower process. And we think around the times, Swami Vivekananda, it used to be that in different cities across America, before they had other forms of entertainment, it used to be traveling actors would come, and Shakespeare in groups, and they also traveling orators. They'd come to town, and that orator, they'd sell tickets. And the orator would get up there and deliver a speech. And the speech had to be 2 or 3 hours long. Otherwise, people didn't feel like they got their money's worth. And so there was in 1863 in Pennsylvania, there was a memorial event where Edward Everett, who was the dean of Harvard University, he was the invited featured speaker. And he got up there and he delivered a speech. And he went on and on for 2 hours. And at the end, he sat down. And then the second guest, that is the honored guest, who was not a speaker, but he was invited to say something. He got up. And he spoke for 2 minutes. That's the Gettysburg Address. That's Abraham Lincoln was the invited guest. Well, we still remember his words today. But no one has ever forgotten about that long speech. So excessive speech, rajasic speech which is sometimes we ourselves, when we think back on our day about how we've gone on and on talking about trivial matters, or maybe we can recall we had a long argument about politics or current affairs, and in retrospect, we kind of regret it in the interests of streamlining our life, in the interests of time management. It would have been good, we think back, it would be good maybe if I could edit some of that behavior out. Now, in religious traditions, we know that, well, one way to deal with excessive speech, that is rajasic speech, would be just to say nothing. To practice what in Sanskrit is called mauna. That means taking a vow of silence. You're just going to stop talking. And we know that, well, there was a guy who came here, one of the early pioneers, not call him a pioneer, but he was one of the early figures of Indian philosophy, or one of the first or the earliest of the Indian saints and avatars to come to America. His name was Meher Baba. Well, he had hundreds of thousands of followers in India, from Bombay. Very popular at that time when he came to America in the late 1930s. He made friends with many famous movie stars in Hollywood. And he was regarded, he was an Indian holy man. But he practiced silence. 43 years, he never said a word. Of course, he traveled with an interpreter who kind of spoke for him. Sometimes he would write on a pad or a slate. Similarly, we know that if we read in the autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi, Gandhi used to practice silence. For many years, he practiced on Mondays. He wouldn't speak. And even in his most busiest time, maybe he would write something on a board or but he wouldn't speak. He would be practicing silence. In this tradition, the teachers of this tradition do not recommend such practices because they're considered to be forms of asceticism. And one problem with asceticism, that is extreme self-privation. See, to speak is a natural human, that's what makes us human. That's a natural human behavior. So to suppress that is a form of extreme asceticism. That's just not using your arms or legs or something. But not only that, just in practical terms, it's extremely difficult to actually follow through on this and do it. Once there were 4 Zen Buddhist monks, and these 4 young monks, they decided they're going to take a vow of silence. They're not going to say a word for the next month. And to begin their vow, they sat together to meditate. They all closed their eyes. And just a few moments had passed before the first monk, he opened his eyes there and he looked and he saw the lamp in the meditation hall. And before he thought, he said, the oil is running low. And the second monk opened his eyes. He said, you just spoke. And the third monk said, you two just spoke. And the fourth one said, you see, I'm the only one who hasn't said anything. So like that, it's difficult to practice this form of complete silence. And it's unnatural. And therefore, in the yoga tradition of yoga, the emphasis is always on rather not an extreme abstinence, but on perfect moderation. That is the middle path. Perfect moderation is more difficult than extreme abstinence. Which brings us to the third guna. It's called sattva. Sattva guna. Sat is a Sanskrit word. It has 3 meanings. It means reality, it means goodness, and it means truthfulness. It's all kind of words derived from that Sanskrit root. And so sattva and sattvic. Sattvic, maybe we could say, translated as spiritual. Sattvic means is that you're kind of refined, but not just refined, you're also, your spiritual, your consciousness, higher spiritual consciousness is awakened. And sattvic speech, the content of such speech is all about soul, God, and religion. That is, the sattvic person, that's what he loves to talk about. Sri Ramakrishna said that God is like a magnet, and the individual soul, the mind of the jiva, is like a piece of iron. And the iron is naturally drawn to the magnet. But we may say, well, I don't know, my mind is not naturally drawn to God. Well, that's because maybe the iron is embedded in mud, and the mud is all caked and hardened, and the poor iron can't even move. And so you have to bring it out of the mud, wash off all the mud. Only then will it be drawn to the magnet. Similarly, it is with the sattvic person. It's a person who is, whose mind is naturally drawn to that higher ideal. And although a sattvic person can speak politely about on any subject, but what he really likes to talk about is soul, God, and religion. Now, the three qualities of this sattvic speech, which are defined in the Bhagavad Gita, 17th chapter, 15th verse. And they go on, commentators, if you want to read the extensive commentary on this verse, which is all about the austerity of speech. The austerity of speech, not the asceticism. But that means the self-discipline of speech. Self-discipline means here raising your mind. You see, what we are is jivas. All that we are, we're pure consciousness. But apart from that, as jivas, we're nothing but a field of energy. It's matter and energy. That's all the body and the mind is. And energy has a frequency and it has a vibration. And just as we were talking there about cussing people out, we're talking here about raising your level of vibration. And a scale, if you go the 0 to 1,000, that all of the Tamasic speech is down below 100. Maybe it's around the vibrational level. Calibrates maybe at about 20 or 30 or 40 on the Hawkins scale of vibrational levels, measuring our emotions and our thoughts and our perception of God and our speech. So we have to raise that's what spiritual life then is. It's just raising our vibrational level up into the over 450 at least. And sattvic speech is like that. In that particular verse, it uses 3 words. And that is, sattvic speech is truthful, and it is pleasant, and it's beneficial. Satya, Priya, Hita. And, Satya, Sat, that's our word. Sat, that means truth. Truth is a big deal in Vedanta. Truth with a capital T. There is an ultimate truth. There is a truth of the matter. These are huge, big philosophical, metaphysical claims. And truthfulness is the first, is the virtue. Certainly the greatest exemplar of truthfulness is Sri Ramakrishna, who is not only truthful and honest and honorable and veracity and integrity, all those synonyms of truthfulness are exemplified in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. And he was a Mahatma, we used to call him Mahatma Gandhi. They call him Mahatma Gandhi. A Mahatma is defined as manasyekam, vachasyekam, karma, nyekam Mahatmanam. That means a Mahatma, a great soul, is a person whose thought, whose speech, and whose actions are all the same. They're all in alignment. Perfect example is Sri Ramakrishna. That's called integrity. And truthfulness, truth alone triumphs, not untruth. These are famous verses from the Mundaka Upanishad, engraved on every piece of Indian currency. Look at an Indian rupee note. those words, Satyam Eva Jayate, truth alone triumphs. It's kind of the motto of India. So certainly that's the first characteristic of sattvic speech. The adjective that we could use, it's truthful. Second adjective, it is pleasant. Holy Mother used to say, always tell the truth, but never tell a harsh truth, an unpleasant truth. Now that kind of requires to think about that a little bit, what that means. Once there was a Maharaja who wanted to have his horoscope read. And so he invited the famous astrologers. And one astrologer was given all of the information. He calculated the sun sign and the moon sign and the position of all the planets, and then consulted this big Sanskrit books on astrology, did all the mathematical calculations, and he came up with his conclusion. And he said, Your Majesty, according to your horoscope, you are going to perform the funeral ceremonies of all of the members of your family and many of your friends. Now the king, when he heard this, he was not happy at all. He loved his family. He loved his friends. And so he threw that astrologer into the dungeon to call somebody else. Do a recalculation. So another astrologer was called, and he was given all the information. And he calculated the sun sign, the moon sign, the position of all the planets, did all the mathematics. And he came up with the same conclusions. But he knew what had happened to the previous astrologer, and he was more diplomatic. And he said, Your Majesty, according to my calculations, you are going to live a very, very long life. In fact, you're going to outlive everybody in your family and most of your friends. And the king thought, a long life? Well, very good, thank you very much. And rewarded the astrologer. Well, essentially, he said the same thing. He told the truth, but he put it in a more nicer way. A play that was more pleasant. Characteristic of sattvic speech. Third characteristic is called beneficial. That is, it is a benefit not just to one person and another person, but it's a benefit to the whole world. That is, whatever you say, whatever a sattvic person says, it benefits the whole world. Now you may think, well, that's a pretty high standard. But you have to understand that these yogis, they're speaking here about, when we speak about karma yoga begins with the assumption, before you can begin the practice of karma yoga, that means cultivating sattvic speech, and you have to be established in dharma. That is, you have to be, it assumes, all of the yogas assume that you are established in dharma and that you are doing your natural duty. And if you are doing that, you are a good person. You may not meditate or believe in God even, but if you're a good person and you follow your dharma, do your dharma, then in fact, your dharma by its very nature is part of, that's the benefits, the collectivity of the collective of the human, the body of all humanity. Just as our organs of the body, each particular part of our cell in our body functions, doing its duty, doing its natural duty, benefits the whole body. Similarly, as a person doing his dharma benefits the whole world just by that action. So it's not hard to understand what is called hita. Hita means acting for the welfare of others. This is made famous by Swami Vivekananda in his motto for this Ramakrishna order, Atmano Mokshartam Jagad Hitayacha, that is working for your own liberation. Every karmic action you do, why? What is it for? What's the purpose of it? Well, it's for my own liberation. And it is for the good of the world. That means I'm following Dharma. So we have the those three categories: Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. The red, the white, and the black. That's the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. And this morning we focused on speech, acts. But whatever we say, these principles hold true for our thought, our speech, and our physical behavior. But we have a lot of issues. All of us as spiritual aspirants have a lot of issues around our verbal behavior. And therefore, it would be very good for us to be mindful of our speech acts as part of our practice of karma yoga. Swami?
Thank you, Swami Vedarupananda ji, for your fascinating talk on speech karma, and gives us a lot to think about. Welcome to all of you. Those of you who are here for the first time, special welcome. We do this every Sunday at 11. We have a bookshop and is open, and we have refreshments afterwards. Swami Vedarupananda will greet you at the door, and then he will go to the living room next to the bookshop, where he'll be available for further discussion, to take your questions or your objections, as he likes to say. And next week, our speaker will be Swami Sarvadevananda, and his topic, Worship God as Mother. This month is coming the celebration of Divine Mother. So you'll find a lot of the topics will be around that. And we are celebrating Durga Puja, worship of Divine Mother, in Santa Barbara on the 21st. That's Saturday the 21st. All are warmly invited to attend that worship celebration, 11 a.m., Saturday, 21st October. And then, of course, there'll be Sunday, the 12th November, will be at the Kali Puja here at night. Our Karma Yoga Day will be on the 14th. That is Saturday the 14th. We'll do some service here around the temple and in the gardens and all of that. So you're invited to join us for that as well. And Swami Sarvadevananda comes back from his travels on Tuesday. So thank you.
Om Dyo Shanti Antariksha Ham Shanti Prithivi Shanti Apa Shanti Oshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Saravam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Same Shantiredhi Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om, peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and in the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. Join us in the green room for your questions and commentary.